Hello, everyone, and thanks for being here for our webinar on the rise of genomics. I'm Dr. Rasu Shrestha, Chief Innovation Officer at UPMC and Executive Vice President at UPMC Enterprises. I'll be your moderator for today's webinar, which is brought to you by the Center for Connected Medicine, or CCM, and its partners, GE Healthcare, IBM, Lenovo Health, Nokia, and UPMC. The CCM, which convenes thought leaders to discuss vital issues in healthcare, has been watching with great interest the growing trend of genomics at the intersection of consumerism, commercialization, and healthcare. To dig into this topic, we've assembled an esteemed panel of experts from many parts of the field of genomics. They are Dr. Jill Hagenkord, Chief Medical Officer at Color, an innovative genetic testing company. Dr. Mylynda Massart, a co-investigator with the All of Us Pennsylvania project, which will collect and study the genomes of over 1 million Americans. Dr. Martin Reese, founder and CEO of Fabric Genomics, a company which helps healthcare providers and researchers analyze and interpret genomic data. I should also mention that Fabric is a UPMC Enterprises portfolio company. And we also have Dr. Houman Modarres, Senior Director of IP Networks at Nokia, a company on the leading edge of networking technology. From our panelists today, you can expect to learn more about the different types of genomic testing, where and how these products are available, and who's actually purchasing them. How genomic data is being leveraged by healthcare providers, the technology, security, and infrastructure demands of genomic data, the goals for genomic research and precision medicine, and some of the concerns and challenges presented by this rapidly advancing field. Before I begin, I really want to let the attendees know how they can participate in this conversation. Please tweet your questions to us using the hashtag #RiseOfGenomics or submit questions in the Q&A field of the webinar platform. Following the webinar, we'll work with our panelists to answer as many of these questions as possible. We'll publish those answers in a blog post on the CCM's website shortly. Now I want to quickly set the stage for our panelists by reviewing some of the developments that have gotten us to this point. I think one of the first big questions is, why is there so much excitement around genomics right now? Over the last 15 years, since the Human Genome Project completed the first sequence of a human genome, there have been incredible advances in the science and technology of genomics, which has made testing more affordable and accessible than ever before. The graphics on this slide really provide some examples of these many advances that we've been making. These developments have really generated a lot of interest from many corners of healthcare, including consumers, researchers, health systems, industry partners, pharmaceutical companies, and the government. Investment in genomic startups is growing, driven in part by consumer demand for genetic tests. Health systems want to personalize treatments to create value for their patients. Pharmaceutical companies are trying to develop more effective medications. Governments are diving into research initiatives like All of Us that aim to collect genomic data at scale so it can be analyzed to unearth population health insights. With all of that in mind, our conversation today will focus on the use of genomics in healthcare. However, it's worth noting that genetic testing is also used in ancestry and wellness contexts too. There are three business models for where and how genomic testing in healthcare are available that we should be aware of. First, there's direct-to-consumer. The direct-to-consumer model obtains FDA approval to sell genomic sequencing products direct to consumers who pay for them out of pocket. Physician involvement is not quite required, and results cannot be used for clinical decision-making. They must be retested in a federally certified lab known as a CLIA lab. Then there's the easy access model, which sells directly to consumers but with physician involvement. Oversight and interpretation is done by a credentialed medical professional. Easy access companies facilitate physician orders and genetic counseling. The results can be used for clinical decision-making. Lastly, there's the clinical model, which is when a healthcare provider or physician is responsible for recommending or facilitating genomic testing and counseling in a healthcare setting. Health insurance companies may or may not reimburse for testing depending on the circumstances. There are different regulatory requirements for the different applications and models. This complexity intensifies when you consider how quickly the industry and the regulations are changing. Which brings us to the challenges. While there are many reasons to be excited and hopeful for the future of genomics in healthcare, the industry faces some headwinds. And here are some of them. First, there's the rapidly changing landscape, which creates the potential for consumer confusion. In March, 23andMe became the first company to receive FDA approval for over-the-counter test that tells consumers their genetic risk for a variety of conditions, from Parkinson's and Alzheimer's to celiac disease. Still, questions remain about whether a physician prescription should be necessary to order certain genomic tests and whether consumers should be required to receive genetic counseling to help them understand these tests. Second, there's limited reimbursement, and that's another challenge. In direct-to-consumer and easy access models, consumers expect to pay out of pocket, but in clinical settings, limited reimbursement negatively impacts health systems, though it creates opportunities for the private industry. Then there are privacy concerns. Consumers are questioning not only the security of their genomic data, but also its ownership and how it'll be used. A Rock Health study found nearly 90% of consumers believed that they should be in control of who has access to their genetic data. And then there are opportunists who are riding the genomics wave, companies that use data or methods that aren't not clinically valid. And these have emerged with products that appear connected to health but are not really validated and may ultimately cause consumer confusion or distrust. With that backdrop, I really want to turn to our panelists to get their perspectives on the important questions facing the field. We're going to lead off with the one and only Dr. Jill Hagenkord. Jill is a pathologist by training with subspecialty boards in molecular genetic pathology. At Color, Jill is involved in health product strategy, partnerships, and the development of provider and patient tools. We're really fortunate to have Jill with us, and I'm excited that you'll have the opportunity to hear her perspectives on how consumers are driving the genomics industry forward and what opportunities this creates for health systems. Welcome, Jill. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Rasu.
Jill, so let's get into this. My first question for you really has two parts. What do we know about the types of patients who are requesting genetic testing, and what can health systems do with this knowledge?
Great question. And I'm going to go ahead and answer this, assuming that we're talking about health-related in-home genetic testing or easy access genetic testing. And what we know about the consumer of this kind of information is that they're just curious, health-motivated information seekers. They tend to be very happy. I mean, greater than 90% of people in multiple companies that I'm aware of, the clients will opt to participate in IRB research, answering survey questions about themselves, and sharing their data, their genetic data in aggregate, de-identified aggregate form, and that they actually feel good about that philanthropic effort of helping, and they especially love it when you give them information back about themselves. We know now that through several studies, including things like PGen study at Harvard and others that have come out of 23andMe, that if these reports are well designed, that consumers actually can understand the limitations of the test and the meaning of the results, even complex concepts like ethnic specific residual risk. And so companies that go DTC have to actually prove that comprehension as part of getting their DTC approval from the FDA. People enjoy learning about themselves. We're picking up signal that they may be more activated to change their lifestyle, medication, compliance. And this, I think, would be something, interesting for doctors to be aware of, that, to know that if somebody's done this, direct-to-consumer or easy access genetic testing to learn about themselves and their health, that they might be ripe for suggestions about healthier lifestyle changes. And then one of the things that I found really interesting when I was at 23andMe is that when the company asked their customers, what do you do after you get your results? The most common thing is that they talk to their family about their family health history. And that kind of gets us to the second half of your question. What can health systems do with these results, or when their patients come in and share their results? And the family history one, I think, is a great opportunity. What Color did is, knowing that information, we actually built out our family testing tool to make it collaborative, so that you can, sit on your couch and on your smartphone or on your laptop and add in all of your family members' emails, and then you guys can collaborate on making sure that you get the information correct and accurate. And then the next time you go to your doctor, everybody in your family's got a more complete family history to share. Other ways that it can be useful in the health system, in some of these, the one point I want to make stress in a difference in technology is that, the early, kind of first generation DTC companies were on a technology called a SNP array, and it just looks at a few spots, relatively speaking, in the genome, as opposed to the newer ones who use next generation sequencing, which is able to look, at every single base pair, essentially across a gene or a region of the genome. And clinical testing for genetics is done by NGS. We don't use the SNP arrays for clinical genotyping. It's just a kind of technology that's not optimized to do that. But you can still get health-related results off of a SNP array in a DTC setting. And they, like I said, they can create these teachable moments, these health awareness moments that a physician could leverage. It can also help rule in previously unsuspected causes. Like there's, I know of a story where an adult father had 3 kids and was the carrier for fructose deficiency. And his third son, when he was born, just behaved differently, ate differently, didn't eat sweets, or would get sick if he ate sweets, wouldn't eat ice cream. They couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. He was also kind of lethargic, increasingly. And from his DTC consumer genetic results, he knew that he was a carrier of that condition, and the symptoms of that condition sounded like what his son had. And so, at first the pediatrician didn't believe them. So then he went to a different pediatrician who did the workup for fructose deficiency, and indeed that's what the child had. So it can help reduce the time to unsuspected diagnoses. And then the last point I want to make there is the raw data from these DTC labs is not validated analytically or in the clinical claims if you put it through some third-party interpretation software. So never use that information clinically. It may not even be correct at all. It might be technically even an inaccurate call on that. So never do that, and never let your physician act on those results. But then the other way that we can use this in a healthcare system is the companies like Color who do next generation sequencing, and we can detect high impact preventable genetic disorders. We're in a CLIA laboratory regulatory setting, so these can be used for patient management decisions. We actually have data showing now that for the Tier 1 CDC genomic conditions, which are BRCA1 and 2, Lynch syndrome, which is a hereditary colorectal cancer syndrome, and hereditary high cholesterol, called FH, that is actually cost effective to screen at a population level for those 3 conditions. And if a health system implements that across their patient population, as some early moving health systems have done, they have a very high level of patient satisfaction, of feeling engaged and well taken care of and supported by their health system. And so there's some marketing cachet that can come with that, along with the opportunity for prevention and early detection. But again, like I mentioned before, know the limitations of each test, because each company is a little bit different in how they apply these technologies.
That's really fascinating, Jill. Thank you for those insights. Jill, it really seems that the engaged, activated patients interested in their healthcare would be a highly desirable audience for health systems. So that really brings me to my next question. Why aren't more health systems offering genetic testing to more patients? And what role is reimbursement playing in all of this, Jill?
Yeah, I think, it's like the slide that you showed earlier that had the timeline. I mean, it was almost 20 years ago that, we completed the Human Genome Project. And, it was all this great, possibilities of how this can improve health and provide more preventative opportunities, better targeted therapies. But I think we still had a lot of work to do behind the scenes to in the bioinformatics and technology improvement to get the technology more and more accurate and to get and to bring the price down further. Because we have to start to get to a place where it's inexpensive enough where we can start using it kind of quote unquote outside the system, because there's that reimbursement problem that we'll talk about some more about. But, kind of once you get this down to a consumer price point, then you can start implementing and tracking health outcomes and getting the necessary data and dossier that you need to go speak with payers to get a full coverage decision. And so we're just kind of getting to that point where we're ready to start implementing. We had to do some big research studies where we were doing genomic sequencing on, large unselected populations so that we can better understand what mutations in these genes mean in this unselected population. And so we've kind of passed all of that now, really just in the last year. And so you can start to see now some professional society momentum building. At American College of Medical Genetics and Genomics this year, which was the last month, there was an entire session dedicated to population screening and health system implementation for these three conditions that I've listed there. And then very soon the National Academy has a Genomics and Public Health Action Collaborative. And, we've been having workshops and working on a white paper. And very soon we'll publish a white paper that is a guidance for health systems or public health institutions or military or, other types of vehicles for implementing population screenings for these three, preventable conditions, kind of what are the considerations you need to implement, and recommending these three conditions as the best place to start. And then my company, Color, is partnering with health systems as well as self-insured employers, as the self-insured employers are one of the few entities and stakeholders in healthcare that are somewhat incentive to pay for prevention, because they want to keep their employees, happy and engaged and productive, for decades. And so we've had great success in working with large employers like Levi's and Visa and BlackRock and Salesforce to offer this kind of preventative genetic testing to all of their employees as a health benefit. And now we're engaging with health systems to do the same for their employees and or their patient population. And the tool that Color has put together is really kind of an end-to-end solution for hospital systems to just, plug and play and start giving this preventative health information to their populations. And then as far as the reimbursement goes, it has been a problem, and there's different levels to the problem. So for if you want to get it covered by insurance, you have to meet criteria, which means you have to have a significant personal or family history of one of these hereditary conditions. But the data actually shows that those criteria are too stringent, and we are leaving behind anywhere from 20 to 50% of people who are mutation carriers in these three conditions. If you only test the ones who meet clinical criteria, 50% of those people will not qualify for testing. So, I mean, clearly those criteria are too stringent. But like I said, now if we're actually at a population level screen and it's cost effective, it really raises the question of, how low do you make that criteria to just make the criteria go away? And then again, it's a price point now where people can self-pay. I mentioned the self-insured employer. And now, we're working with certain payers and academic partners to try to get coverage with evidence development, which is where they cover it while you're still in the outcomes research phase. And then you collect the outcome data in a system-specific way and then review it again with the payers to see if they can cover it. So we really are making good progress.
Well, thank you so much, Jill. I truly agree with you on the power of data, right? So as we accrue more information and the health economic benefit for testing becomes evident, as you laid out there, I believe that we'll see a monumental leap forward in clinical genomics. So thank you. Those are just remarkable insights from you, Jill. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Next, we're really fortunate to speak with Dr. Mylynda Massart, who is on the provider and research side of the industry and has a distinct and interesting perspective to share with us. Mylynda works on community education and engagement for the All of Us Pennsylvania effort, one of the state-based arms of the NIH-backed All of Us initiative, which earlier this month launched its program to collect and study the genomes of over 1 million Americans. Mylynda is also a family medicine physician here at UPMC, where she frequently works with patients on conditions pertaining to their genomic data. Thank you so much for being here, and welcome, Mylynda.
Thank you. It's great to be here today.
Mylynda, so this is great, right? So, you and I are both from UPMC, and, one of the questions that I really wanted to kick us off with is, what are primary care physicians wary of the consumer genomics movement? Why are primary care physicians wary of the consumer genomics movement, and what should they be doing in response?
Yes, so this is a really great question, and research has shown that really the largest barrier to integration of genomics and precision medicine in our healthcare system currently is the lack of education and confidence amongst the primary care providers who are taking care of patients. And as we talked about earlier, with respect to consumer genomics, until recently, there really hasn't been a large amount of clinically useful data to drive physicians to obtain that knowledge and education and to become more comfortable in handling that data. However, now we're really seeing increasing higher levels of data being returned with associated increased risk and need for clinical action. In addition, we all recognize that we're now in an age of patient-driven medicine, and patients are really seeking out this information. As Jill said, they're highly engaged, and the healthcare workforce really needs to prepare themselves to respond appropriately and know how to appropriately handle that data and interpret it clinically.
Thank you, Mylynda. I couldn't agree with you more. This is an exciting time for physicians, for sure. Healthcare providers need to make sure physicians are equipped and comfortable to really welcome genomics. Mylynda, what's the link between the All of Us initiative and providers, and why is it important?
Yeah, so the link between All of Us and providers is really as a driving force, as I mentioned before. Now that we're seeing this clinical level of data get to this level, providers are really starting to recognize that they need to get on board, seek that education, and prepare themselves to be able to respond to the results that will be returned. All of Us is important for so many reasons. The sheer size of it is going to be a driving force, not just in research and how we practice medicine in the future, but it really can help to change and advance education by creating a need for more CME and ongoing education for providers, as well as making genomics and precision medicine education a priority. as I mentioned before, for the return of results and preparing our electronic health records to handle this level of data. I think also we'll start seeing policy change driven by all of us around healthcare, especially insurance, and possibly expansion on the GINA Act, and a lot of discussion, as we've already noticed in the media recently, around privacy and data security.
Yep. Thank you, Mylynda. I completely agree with you. I think there's more change yet coming at us, and it's really interesting the remarkable efforts that you're leading with this massive All of Us initiative. So thank you. So we at UPMC echo your excitement for initiatives that'll make us make great strides in precision medicine. We look forward to following the progress of All of Us and supporting the research. Now I'd like to turn to another panelist and dive deeper into the analytics behind genomics and personalized medicine with Dr. Martin Reese, founder, president, and CEO of Fabric Genomics, a genomics analytics company. Martin specializes in machine learning and bioinformatics. He co-created 2 algorithms that are key components to Fabric Genomics software platform, which is used by healthcare providers and researchers to analyze and interpret genomics data. Before founding Fabric Genomics, Martin was involved in the Human Genome Project, a groundbreaking initiative that first decoded the human genome. Welcome, Martin, and thank you for being here.
Thanks, Rasu. Good morning, everyone.
Hi. So, Martin, how close are we to delivering truly personalized medicine to patients based on their genetics?
Back to Jill's comments, the Human Genome Project, which we completed in 2001, it's now 17 years ago. And since then, what is really stunning is that now we're able to sequence a whole genome in one day, and that for approximately $1,000. So that price drop has helped us a lot. And as promised by the leading sequencing technology provider, Illumina, as you can see on the slide, in 2007, that cost is even going further down to $100 for an entire genome in the next couple of years. And this technology jump has created a true bottleneck on the big data and the interpretation. And therefore, the issue is not anymore the sequencing technology, but big data interpretation and understanding all of this data. In the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen a tremendous progress in applying genetics to healthcare. Let me give you a few examples on typical genetic tests and the growth of them. And these are all clinical tests that are clinical validated. First, breast and ovarian cancer. In 2013, roughly 180,000 patients got their genetic risk assessed. That number grew to 500,000 in 2017. And Myriad Genetics was the first company to offer that test and still has roughly more than 50% market share. And then next is oncology. And in oncology, where we test the cancer tissue of a cancer patient to determine the right treatment options based on the genomic profile of the cancer. So here, we're not testing the germline DNA. We're actually testing the tissue, the cancer tissue. And that market showed a 10x growth in the last 5 years. And is even faster growing than the breast cancer germline market. And again, the company Foundation Medicine is a pioneer in that market, and as of today, they still have 50% market share. And then let me point you to a newer, fast-growing market in pediatric genetics. In that market, especially children are getting testing that have an undiagnosed disease, typically also called diagnostic odysseys. In these cases, scientists are not trying to test for a specific disease, but apply whole genome or whole exome sequencing to identify the genetic disease by analyzing a whole genome to test for all known 8,000 Mendelian diseases all at once. And that market, as you can see in the table, is faster growing, the fastest growing market in the last 5 years. And again, the possibility is just because we now can actually sequence a whole genome. And as Jill indicated, that these chips are going to get replaced by this next generation sequencing technology. With Illumina's push to faster, simpler, and cheaper machines, And software companies like Fabric Genomics, we are democratizing the genetic testing market. In the last 5 years, tens, if not hundreds of other companies are offering similar genetic tests worldwide, following the lead by Myriad Foundation and, of course, many others. And lastly, what we're seeing is that more and more hospitals are implementing these tests themselves. And we are making great progress to bringing these tests into every hospital in the world. Fabric Genomics, just as an example, is a small company, but we have customers in 15 countries and all of the continents around the world, including Saudi Arabia, Australia, and South Africa. And I strongly believe that the trend is continuing, and in 2030, every patient that needs genetic testing will be sequenced in the clinic. Let me give you one of the most exciting leading research projects in genomics, and that's Rady's Children's Hospital in San Diego. Stephen Kingsmore and his team are sequencing NICU, PICU infants. So these are little children in the ICU unit, where they apply whole genome sequencing as a first line of test performed in under 36 hours on a routine basis. Just think about that. We sequenced the whole genome in tens of years, and now we can do it in 36 hours. Stephen and his team just accomplished a record from sample collection to fully validated clinical report in less than 20 hours. And they just finished with our software approximately 200 cases last year with a diagnostic rate of a stunning more than 40%. And in over 2/3 of these diagnosed children, a change of medical treatment was prescribed. And this is now expanding, and he already has signed up 5 other children's hospitals just in the last 3 months based on the initial results in 2017. And then lastly, our partner at UPMC, who has just implemented with our software a comprehensive breast and ovarian cancer test at the McGee Women's Hospital at a large healthcare system, with additional tests to follow. UPMC has taken the extra step in linking the genomic test with their own EMR. We've worked with them to connect the EMR data directly with the genetic test, and that totally opens a new level of care for their patients by coupling both owning and having access to the genomic data, but also the EMR data in a healthcare institution. All the examples I showed you have a clear clinical benefit, and insurance reimbursement is already established and is getting better and better, a critical aspect for genomic test adoption. And the new way to sequence healthy populations and to use genetics to predict disease and allow preventative treatment and not only treat disease. And of course, all of us and the direct-to-consumer plays are great examples of that.
Yeah, well, thank you, Martin. You know, it's really exciting to see just how far we've come in such a relatively short period of time. But of course, there's always so much more that can be done. I mean, just the stats that you mentioned, 43% diagnosis rate with the actionability of those results. It's not just about, getting to that high diagnosis rate, but really making it actionable. That's really important. And then, the stat that you had or have on the slide there where, you've got less than an hour turnaround time for analysis. That's just, again, remarkable. So we've come a long, long way for sure. Martin, I really wanted to sort of hone in on another aspect of something that I think needs to be unboxed today on this discussion. So what are the hurdles that really needs to be overcome to link the large genomic studies that are underway, but also linking with patient health data that's really locked away in EMRs? So what are those hurdles? Could you perhaps talk to us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and these are hurdles that I think the whole community has been fighting for a very long time. I would say there are 2 main hurdles. One is the genetic data security and protection. And really the key there is often the right consents are not given, while the genomic data could be used to discover new drugs and treat the right patients with the right drugs, and assist in drug discovery, assist in clinical trials and post-marketing studies. Many of the projects that we got involved in, it's always hanging at the consent form, and then people are doing consent form, and it gets delayed. And everything that we have seen in our studies is that the patients actually do want to give the consent, but institutions are just not set up to advise patients what that really means. So what is really critical, in my opinion, is the correct consenting upfront when the patients get signed on. Of course, direct-to-consumer studies are great. The problem a little bit, in my opinion, is that we're not treating patients. We actually most of the time have healthy individuals. So it's a little bit less relevant for pharma and biotech. So consenting is a key issue for all these new studies. And then the second biggest hurdle is, as you said, that is the EMR data and outcome data is locked away in healthcare provider systems and not accessible to genetic studies. Honestly, I hope and believe that every patient gets the whole genome sequence in the healthcare system in a couple of years. But what we really need to do is linking the EMR data. If we can do that, that will generate a tremendous source of knowledge that pharma would love to tap in. We have a lot of interest from pharma, and every single time the question is, can we link it to outcome data and EMR data? So not only do I encourage every healthcare system to do that, and UPMC has been really a driver there, but what would be even better is if we could actually share patient outcome data between and across healthcare systems. But that probably is a couple of years away. And as you can see in the graphic that I've shown there, where the circle closes at the end, where through patient engagement, diagnostic insights are being generated, and then predictive and preventive medicine can be performed. And that really is all to the benefit of the patient. And I think, you really need to try to close that circle to really, truly implement precision medicine.
I completely agree with you. I think the power is really in unlocking the data and really getting the insights that are meaningful and making those insights actionable at the point of decision making. Thank you, Martin. I'm looking forward to seeing your continued progress here in this ever-changing industry. Now I'll turn to examine the infrastructure and technology frameworks that have allowed this industry to continue to advance and really position the industry to advance even further. To discuss the data considerations that come along with genomics, I'm really pleased today to have as my next guest, Mr. Houman Modarres, Senior Director of IP Networks at Nokia. Houman has a long history on the leading edge of networking technology. He's here to speak with us about the infrastructure, the security, and the network demands of this growing data-heavy field like genomics. Welcome, Houman, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Rasu. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Houman, so let's jump straight into this because you're an expert in this field, and I think the expertise that you bring to the table here today in our discussion is really important as we're trying to figure out how do we really take this to another level? How do we position ourselves for success in terms of the infrastructure, security, and network demands that I mentioned earlier? So, Houman, my first question to you really is, what are the biggest challenges of genomics for traditional health systems, data storage systems and networks, and how can they deal with the rapid expansion in data brought on by genomics?
Well, on the infrastructure side, some of the biggest challenges are generally around handling the sheer volumes of data properly and doing it securely and gracefully, making sure the network infrastructure stays out of the way and it's part of the security solution, not the problem. As the demand grows and grows, as there's more traffic to pass around in the store, we have to stay on track to scale out the infrastructure. There's big data coming at us, and our job is to get it to the right systems that can make sense of it and get insights out of it. And, of course, the goal is that we can use those insights to make life better for people, longer, healthier, more pleasant lives. So assuming that we do that, then the biggest challenge is data privacy, because it's a major concern to healthcare providers and to patients and consumers as well, especially as we look at these new opportunities with the rise of genomic testing and other direct-to-consumer offerings. So let's look at it that way if we can. On the data side, you're absolutely right. This community, the community of healthcare professionals as a whole, spins up over 150 exabytes of data. That's massive, right? Because an exabyte is 1 million terabytes. Not only is it massive, it's growing 50% or more every year. And the rise of genomics that we're talking about today, that's just another application that adds to the mix. It adds to that demand. But the IT and infrastructure teams that are building and running the networks, the data centers, the connectivity for our healthcare institutions, they're on top of it. In a lot of cases, they've thought about this growth and they're ready for it. Just like the progress you mentioned in decoding the genome and making it more affordable, there's been a super steep progress curve on the IT infra side, on the network compute and storage as well. In the case of genomics data, the sequencers today generate a couple hundred megabits per second each. And that's as they sequence the samples, give or take. So assuming there's a half a dozen sequencers, then you have a stream of about 1.2 gigabits per second. But that gigabit stream needs to run nonstop, anywhere from a day to a couple days. Now, as Dr. Reese just mentioned, that's being sped up quite a bit with the latest advances, right? But nonetheless, it has to run uninterrupted for that whole time. And then the sample's fully processed and sequenced. Now, that bandwidth by itself is not actually that strenuous, right? By far, genomics isn't going to be the dominant traffic source for healthcare facilities, even if it gets, or even as it gets, massive appeal. Digital pathology applications, for example, they're a ton more bandwidth intensive. So the networks can certainly handle the traffic, and they're built with the clinical redundancy to make sure that the streams run clean and run uninterrupted. So with redundant routers, with redundant links and things like that. We're talking about terabit routers that are already in there in the networks of our major healthcare providers. We're talking about optical networking infrastructure that connects the sites, the labs, and the data centers with massive capacity and terabit speeds. So basically, we have big data that we use to get big insights. Genomics is a great example with a lot of potential. We can handle the data as it gets bigger and bigger. But what about the privacy part, right? That's a big concern, and some of the other speakers rightfully hit on it as well. We want to provide the best possible care, but not at the expense of privacy, right? Our customers don't want to compromise that either. So it's a bigger challenge. It's a big problem for the banks, a big problem for retail. It's the new reality. Just think Equifax or Target or whoever the latest might be to report that their data has been compromised. And healthcare and health IT, of course, aren't immune. In fact, it turns out that healthcare was 9 times more susceptible than banking last year. I mean, that's unbelievable to me, right? 9 times as many breaches, 5 million patient records, on average more than an incident a day. And the problem with a lot of the breaches, as a lot of your IT teams know, the thing that keeps your CIO and the medical records officers awake all night, it's that these breaches are silent killers, right? A lot of times they're latent for weeks and months before you discover them. On average, it takes about 10 months if we look at some 2017 data. So we have to be sure to handle network security and the security of the infrastructure. It's a very important part of maintaining the integrity of data and protecting the privacy of our patients' information. One thing's for sure, Rasu, if these breaches and attacks are common now, then when we add our new consumer-facing applications like genomics, then that's only going to get even that much more attention from the bad guys.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Houman. 150 exabytes of data, that's just absolutely staggering. Thank you for that, the insights there again, Houman. I think people may be surprised and delighted, perhaps at the same time, to learn that leading health systems likely already have the infrastructure in place to facilitate the rise of genomics, and that's something you alluded to. On the flip side, however, I suspect that many agree and are not surprised to hear you say that data privacy is really critical. So with that in mind, I'd like to sort of drill a little deeper into this. So my question to you, Houman, is how can health systems and others in the industry that are handling patient genomic data ensure that information is protected and secure from cyber attacks? So the question here is really, how can they do that?
Well, to be fair, security is always a multidimensional problem. So while I'll share a few data points or comments here to the security experts within health IT, this is only the beginning of the conversation. But basically, you have to cover your bases in a lot of different ways, specifically around genomic data. There's a lot of concern about patient information, as you said, and rightfully so. It's pretty sensitive information. But to be fair, it's just like pretty much everything else we handle in terms of patient records in healthcare. The genomic samples, once they're sent in to be processed, they're abstracted from the patient's identity. Right off the bat, my understanding is that they're given a sample ID, and of course that sample ID is not linked to the patient. So whether that sample goes into a genomics pipeline at labs within the healthcare facility, or whether it goes off-site into the cloud after that, the patient confidentiality isn't at stake. That's an important step, I think. Now, when the facility has their own infrastructure and HPC clusters, high-performance compute clusters, to handle it on site, they run their sequencers and stream the data to local storage, and after that sequencing is done, and that's the couple hundred megabit stream that I mentioned earlier, then there are cloud-based SaaS platforms that are pretty commonly used. For example, this is for filters to run the data through, the filters that give insights into what people might be susceptible to. Of course, these filters change. They improve. They get updated all the time. So a benefit of using the cloud SaaS model is that at any given time, you get the latest filters for the samples. For those cloud partners, there's a very stringent vetting process that covers how the data is stored, how it's encrypted, who owns the keys. And these are providers like DNA Nexus, for instance, and they have to go through third-party penetration tests every year to prove that the platform is secure. And then in terms of how things get into and out of the cloud, there's dedicated links to make sure the data is not compromised there. And all the cloud hosting providers like Amazon and Azure, they also have to adhere to some strict guidelines and SLAs for configuration and firewalls in these applications that are running in the cloud. On top of that, the networks that connect the sites and labs and facilities, they're all moving to more of an insight-driven model. What that means is that the networks are constantly collecting information about themselves, and they're getting information from around the internet. So that way, if there's a denial of service attack that happens, if there's a cyber attack, then the signature for that attack can be passed on. So if the network sees an unusual trend, it can divert or stop that suspicious traffic and weed it out. That really slows down or cuts out the effects of that malicious DDoS attack, that cyber attack. So the networks themselves are more and more becoming part of the security solution rather than propagating the problem. Because if you don't start to do this, then it turns out you're using precious network bandwidth to take the bad traffic or suspicious traffic through your network to scrubbing centers, then bring it back once it's clean. So that in itself is bogs down the network. So it's pretty cool, and it's part of what we call insight-driven IP networking. In general, though, as far as the patient data is concerned, there's network layer encryption within the IP infrastructure. It's encrypted in the cloud. There's penetration testing done with the SaaS providers and security rules and firewalls and config parameters with the cloud provider. And you get full logs of who's logged in or accessed the data. And that's on top of the fact that the genomic sample, again, is abstracted from the patient's identity to begin with. So it's anonymous the whole time. Basically, all this to say that there's a lot being done to safeguard the patient's genomic data, make sure it's protected and secure from cyber criminals, because nobody wants these records compromised. That's rightfully a pretty big concern. But I think as an industry, we're doing the right things and keeping a close eye on it.
Thank you, Houman. I think that was really perfect in breaking it down into some of the core components around data and privacy and some of the things that we really need to be thinking through as we look at the IT and network infrastructure components of making this dream a reality. So really appreciate your insights there. Finally, in the few minutes that we have left, I'd really like to conclude by asking one final question and have our panelists briefly weigh in if they want to. So my question is this. 23andMe CEO Anne Wojcicki recently argued that consumers should have greater access to their genetic information without the oversight of a physician or genetic counselor. How would each of you recommend that the healthcare industry balance the desire of consumers to be in control of their health information with the need to provide accurate information about what these tests actually mean for patient health?
That's a really interesting question. This is Jill speaking. I think as far as like the physician ordering and having physician oversight or healthcare professional oversight, I think we actually have enough data to show, as I mentioned earlier, that when a report is written well and the user interface is done thoughtfully to optimize comprehension, that consumers actually can understand this information. And if you choose to go a pure DTC route, which means you don't need a physician order, there's no healthcare professional required to be involved in the system. You're treated as a manufacturing plant. And if you go that route, like any other over-the-counter, HIV test or pregnancy test, right, they've got to demonstrate user comprehension, understanding the meaning of the results and what to do next. So, the data exists that shows that the consumers can most of the time mostly understand this. The other route that you can go is the CLIA certified route, which is, kind of designed for laboratory testing specifically. And then have, appropriate touch points with healthcare professionals along the way, just removing the barriers, right? You no longer have to take a day off work to go make an appointment to talk to a genetic counselor, and then, do that multiple times in order to actually get to the place of your results. That just leaves too many people behind. Not everybody can just take days off work to go do that. And so if there's ways that we can provide those touch points using telemedicine or other techniques, that still helps ensure that the consumers understand what the meaning of their results are and what their next steps should be. My bigger concern is one that Mylynda brought up, is that physicians don't understand the results. And there's also this kind of, in our healthcare system, there's kind of this inherent incentive to overtreat. I mean, that's how people get paid, right? Doctors get paid by doing procedures, and drug companies get paid by selling drugs, and device companies by selling devices. So there is a tendency to overtreat that's already built into the system. And so my concern is really more of the physicians understanding the results and understanding the limitations of the different kinds of testing and not overtreating in the system.
Yeah, and if I can chip in here, this is Martin Reese. Personally, I also believe that patients should be in control of the healthcare information. And in my opinion, genetic and genomic data should not be very different. Clearly, a large number of patients to interpret an entire genome, it's pretty much impossible. And what the healthcare system should do is they should provide and facilitate access to the appropriate counseling and to comprehensive clinical interpretation. And again, that goes to Mylynda's and Jill's comment that, the patient should have access to the right medical professionals to help interpret these genetic and genomic data.
I absolutely agree, Martin. Mylynda, do you have any insights on this? Because, I think, with all of us and the efforts that you're really leading, and I'd love to hear your perspective specifically around the question that I just put forward.
Yeah, I agree absolutely with Jill and Martin, and I think that, this really is that era of patient-driven medicine, and patients do have the right to own their data and to drive their health care. I also agree fully that we have to be very careful in that we're properly educating the community about genomics and about the limitations of the results and how to utilize them, especially with respect to third-party interpretation. As we mentioned earlier, I've seen numerous cases clinically where that data was inaccurate, and when it was repeated in a CLIA certified lab, the results were actually the opposite. So it's really important to have that education, and then extending all the way to the healthcare system, where we're really creating a primary care workforce who can interpret all this data as patients bring it to their PCPs, have a good understanding of how to interpret the data, how to use it clinically when it needs to be repeated, and not over-treating, as Jill mentioned. In terms of all of us, I think, it's a very parallel concept to 23andMe, as in this case, it will be research participants who are engaging and volunteering to share this data with the All of Us research project. However, there will be eventual return of results to the research participants. And again, we're working very actively to make sure we have a proper education and resource system in place to support the participants as they receive this data, and to eventually support the providers downstream of that.
Well, thank you really to all of our panelists for the remarkable insights. I think overall this was a very wholesome view of the rise of genomics. We talked through the trends, the challenges, the structural, infrastructural components of all of this, the opportunities at hand as well. And so this is really good. So thank you so much to our expert panel for participating in this engaging conversation. Too, to our viewers for tuning in and for your questions. the topic of genomics is so important and so vast that it could be the subject of multiple webinars. However, we hope that you leave us with an understanding of the rise of genomics and the answers to key questions facing the industry. We have been listening to you guys. There's more information and answers to your questions that'll be made available on the Center for Connected Medicine's blog based on some of the questions that you've been asking us as well online and through the webinar platform. Be sure to connect with the CCM on Twitter. The handle is @ConnectedMed, and with me and our panelists in the Twitter sphere, and continue to engage in dialogue on the rise of genomics. Thank you very much.